Hi there and welcome to Mother Knits. My name is Catherine and this is a channel where I love to share my knitting and making journey with you guys. Thank you so much for being here today and clicking on today's video. I had a moment this past week or so when I was looking through some patterns that I'm actually looking at for fall. And there were some pretty intricate patterns that were popping up and that I was hearting and saving to my wish list. And I realized that over the last year, I have developed so many knitting skills very intentionally, not by accident. I was very intentional that I wanted to be an expert knitter as soon as I could. And it took me about a year, in the evenings and as a pretty devoted hobby of mine to feel like I'm now at a place where all of those patterns that I was looking at for this upcoming fall and winter, I feel are approachable. I feel like I know what I would need, the tools I would need, the time I would need, the resources I would need to make that pattern and be fairly certain that I'm going to have a finished object that I'm very proud of and very happy with. Now, I thought it'd be fun to sit down and share with you some of the things that really helped me get there. And when I say expert knitter, all I'm really referring to is if there's something you want to knit, you have the confidence to do it and do it all the way through in a somewhat like relaxed manner without feeling like you're going into something blind. So I thought I would start with things that really kind of took me from that beginner phase into a much more, I would even just a comfort that I have with my knitting now, where it's not it's not taking as much mental energy as it was in the beginning. Now I have to say, if you are making a commitment like this, where you're really diving into something where you're going to be at it for many months, working on these projects on a daily basis, I think that the tools that you have are very important. The first sweater that I finished knitting, that pink sweater that took me a long time to make, that was the first time I learned to knit. That was my first knit project ever. And I was using these wooden needles that I got on Amazon. I bought like a set of knitting needles and I was hesitant to really splurge upwards of like $100 or $200 on a set of knitting needles at that point because I wasn't even sure if I was going to like it. So if you're starting out on your journey and you know that knitting is in your future, I highly recommend you get yourself a pair of interchangeable needles. And that was one of the very first things on my first episode of Mother Knits. I was calling out for help, like, you guys, what are the sets that you like? And I got a lot of different comments. You can even go back to that video and read some of the suggestions there. But what I landed on were the Hiya Sharp needles, and they even come in this wonderful case. Now, I want to talk about not just the needles themselves, that's pretty much a given that you need good tools to do your work, but you also need really effective and simple organization systems. All of my knitting tools are in this sweet little basket here. I've got my try-on tubing that is usually living in there, a pair of really wonderful, these are my sewing scissors, but I love them so much, they make it into my knitting basket quite often, and then a case to keep all of your needles lined up and in order. And then for my cords, those are in my shorty set, so the cords are all here. Now, why that helps you go from that beginner phase into like expert phase, I think when we imagine ourselves as an expert knitter, we see ourselves being able to very quickly get going on a project. I think that's what so many of us are after. And you know what? I'm gonna shut the door because my kids are playing, so just one second. Excuse me, shut the window rather. Hopefully that makes the sound a bit better. So when we want to just be able to open up a pattern. We know we've got the yarn. Have your yarn pretty well organized, and I would even say keeping your stash simplified can really help get things going. I just have one box that all of my yarn fits in, and I divide my yarn up into Ziploc bags, those are my project bags of things that I want to knit in the future. And until I get through a few of those Ziploc bags and use up and get a few projects done, I don't bring new yarn in. Keeping my system really, I don't want to say small, because it takes up space, and I'm happy for the things that I love to do to take up space. But when it becomes overwhelming, that can be such an obstacle to just get going. And that's what you need to improve your skills. You just need to be able to cast on, and you just need to be able to start working on your craft. The other thing I want to touch on while we're on tools is these circle markers. Now, if you're a beginner knitter, these are the round circle place markers that you can use, and then you can also get the light bulb ones, or even those big chunky plastic ones, which I like, that clip, that are like a safety pin. And I like those I want to explain how to use these differently, and I do think it makes just the slightest difference in how quickly you can be knitting. So as you're on this journey to really developing your skills, using these place markers in between pattern repeats is a wonderful idea. Many of my projects I've worked on this year, I've used almost the entire container at one point, marking different spots where there's going to be a repeat. And even though when you're setting that up, it might look excessive, or you might feel like such a beginner needing to use those, the confidence that you're going to gain because the work actually turns out well, you can catch your mistakes so quickly and only go back a few stitches if needed. It's outstanding. So those work for lace, like the big shawl that I worked on this year, and that was like a 12 stitch repeat. And then the color work sweater that I just showed you last week, those are the round markers. Now those safety pin light bulb markers, those are good for actually putting into the fabric. I don't like those sliding across the needles and using those as my beginning of round marker or anything like that, because they can get wedged and get stuck and kind of hold up the flow of things happening. So finding those systems that really allow you to work as efficiently as possible, that is going to really, really help you progress. And then the next thing I want to talk about is taking on projects that are intimidating projects to you. Get the yarn for them and just jump in, and don't be afraid, and know to yourself, make a note that if you have to rip it all out, it's not a big deal. It's just yarn. It's just yarn. And that was something I actually learned in my ceramics class. You'd be working on this piece on the wheel, pulling it up, and there just all of this work that's gone into getting, this vessel started on the pottery wheel. And then, maybe you make one bad move right as it's about finished, and the whole thing topples over. And the phrase in the studio is always like, it's just clay. It's just clay. It's just yarn. So you can rip that out, you can frog it. And I think to become very confident as a knitter, you have to be willing to rip out projects. It just goes along with the craft. So if you have that fear of, I'm going to start something, but I really don't want to have to rip it all out, and you just can't emotionally handle that situation, I'm here to tell you it won't be that bad. You can take it all out and start fresh. And every time I do that, I'm so happy. Once I get back into that groove and I start seeing the work again, and all those little improvements that weren't there the first time around, it just boosts my confidence. And if you can get through that hard moment of ripping it all out, you can do it. Now, the other thing that was very, very helpful for me when I was really getting started and before I made videos and I was just working at this and just, you know, when your fingers feel like they're doing these like gymnastic trips or tricks that are just not natural, is I would create a really relaxing atmosphere for myself where I would sit down in the same spot. All of my knitting stuff is just there. It's set out, it's waiting for me. So if you have pets or if you have little kids or toddlers that you don't want to get into your things, maybe it's in a nice, you know, covered box or some sort of system where but it's very, very easily accessible to where you can just sit down, take the lid off and start working in the same place at the same time every day. There's something about that really develops the skill. And I know that sounds so obvious, but if you're trying to take your project here, there, everywhere, and you don't have like a set routine with it, if it's not built into your daily routine, I would say it's going to be really difficult for you to make the progress that you probably clicked on this video because you're wanting that. You're wanting to see your work advance. So for me, it was just always before bed. I never had time in the mornings or during the day, really. It would be, you know, my husband would take bedtime with the kids. And once that was underway, that was my time to do some knitting before my evening routine. And just even getting a little bit in and just keeping your mind aware of where you are in that project is so helpful, because we forget what the repeat is that we're doing, what row are we on. I want to share what actually helped me, and even though those things may sound quite simple, are you doing them, or are you willing to give that a try if you're not seeing the progress that you want as quickly as you'd like? Now, on those nights where you're just, hands are not going to be knitting, it's just one of those days where you just need to relax, I have a playlist here that you can dive into where you can just be learning about tension, learning about color dominance and stranded color work, about how does mosaic knitting work, what is brioche, like all of these things that when you're looking through patterns on Ravelry and you're starting to feel a little bit like, oh, I don't know if I could do that one because it's got that technique that I don't have any awareness about. Just watch some tutorials on it and sip on some tea just to start to prime your mind in case any of those projects pop up one day and you're like, you know what, I'm familiar enough with the challenge that's going to be ahead of me. And that's what I would do, and really take my time to study, put the video on a slower motion on those nights where my hands were just not up for knitting and I just was ready to put my feet up and have someone teach me something and not be in the learning of the doing of it, I guess is what I mean. Now, here's something I've just recently started implementing, and it's a lot of fun. And if you're a mom, and even if you're not a mom, this is something I want you to try, is that every time you finish a big project, a sweater, a shawl, or just even your first pair of socks, whatever it is that feels like I completed that and I feel so good that it got done, I want you to have a ritual that you do to celebrate that. I think bringing in the element of celebrating what we have accomplished and finished, even if there's mistakes in there that we know about, it doesn't matter. It's finished. You did it. You completed it. And that means you can move on to a next, you've probably gained all sorts of skills in that project, and that is worthy of celebrating. So what I do is I let my kids know when I'm done with this project, we're all going to go out for smoothies, or we're going to go out for ice cream, or I'm going to take you to that one coffee shop and we'll get the biscuits and gravy, or whatever it is that we're really excited about in the season. And this summer, it's been mango smoothies at this little coffee shop that we really love where we're visiting. And so each time I had a finished object, we go and I get the kids smoothies and I get a smoothie. And my daughter insists that I bring the thing that I knitted and it's there with us. And it's a whole ritual that we have now as a family. And why I love that so much as a mother, because when I sit down to knit, it's exciting for my kids now because they're like, oh, what are we going to do when you're finished with that? What are you making? How long is it going to take you? What's going on? And they're now invested in the knitwear and in the projects and very involved. And by keeping them involved, it keeps the atmosphere of like my crafting time really happy and light. And it's not like, oh, mom's going and doing that thing that she does on her own, even though that's very much what's happening. There's encouragement and there's just this whole positive attitude around completion. And that, I just wanted to throw that into this video because I think that that really helps with the motivation to keep going. And really at the end of the day, we all know that that's a lot of just what it takes is just the discipline to sit down and work through those moments and use our brain in new ways. And that's why I'm so attracted to knitting. I want to stay sharp, keep my hands in all the new, and have a few of those things going all the time where I'm being stretched a bit. And if you're that way too, thank you so much for being here. And I would love to connect with you and hear about maybe some of the projects that took you to a next level in the comments. I think that would be just really sweet and encouraging for others to see that we all have those projects that are really helping us up level. I'm wishing you so much joy in your making and in your knitting, and I will see you next week here on Mother Knits. Have a beautiful day.
Appalachian sunrise meets my